Hi guys, this is Sebastian from Madrigal. So I was sitting here working on Project Slide, designing the level that will be the demo level of the game, and I figured why don't I actually just record some of this stuff in case you find it interesting on how I design the levels. So let's do that and see what comes out of it. So just some very quick background. This is the level editor that I'm using to make the game. It's a homemade engine and homemade editor, so it probably looks a bit unfamiliar to you, but it works pretty much the same way as Unity or Unreal or any of the big ones when it comes to designing levels. And the level that you see on the screen right now is the first demo level. If you checked out the previous post I did on the development blog, there was this dev shot that was taken from roughly around this angle. I had a car driving here, and as you can see, if we zoom out a little bit, let's actually turn off the fog for a bit. You can see that there's a very clear difference between this part of the level and this part of the level, and that's because I'm slowly but surely replacing these white box meshes, these big checkerboard meshes with actual assets. And so this part of the level has been mostly decorated, while if we move on to this part of the level, it's kind of empty still. And so the idea is that I'll be moving through the level as I get assets finished and so on. So today I figured I should be kind of covering this area close to the hydro plant. So this is an area of the level that I worked on for the past few days, making these meshes that are kind of like, a lot of these objects are kind of used throughout this level in many different places, while this hydro plant stuff is only very specific to this one point. And now that I got them finished, or at least in a state where I'm kind of happy with them, I'm kind of excited to get back to just improving this overall terrain and kind of these natural features, cliffs and whatnot. So I think what I'm gonna do right now is continue working on this area, and I will probably speed up the video a little bit so that you get not necessarily a time lapse, but something a little faster than my normal designing speed. And then if I have something interesting to say, I'll slow it down and explain that as I go. But yeah, let's start with figuring out this bottom of the river here. Alright, so now we have mostly the bottom of the river painted. I'm gonna go back and add more details and adjust the shape of it a little bit, but we have like the rough idea of how the river will flow. So the idea here is that above the dam there is water, but for reasons explained in the game, they don't use this dam right now, so the bottom of this river will be dry at the moment, which also means that the player can drive into the river if they want, and we're gonna have to give them a way to come back up. I was thinking either make this sort of like a ramp or then over here. I haven't exactly decided that yet. So earlier I was working on this cliff edge here, and I'm not very happy with it. You can kind of clearly see that these are just sort of cliffs put right next to each other like this. Because you can very clearly see the seams where one ends and one begins. In contrast, I think this one works quite nicely. If you look closely, you can still see where one mesh ends and another begins, but it works a lot. It looks a lot more natural than this one. So I'm gonna have to do something about this one here. The rocks that we're using to make these, we have these kind of cliffs, and for each object, they're quite big. I have to scale them down a little bit. For each object, there's a version that doesn't have grass on top of it, and then there's another one that has grass, and this grass is put into place using a material, a shader, which means that we can just rotate these guys however we want, and it will place the grass on top of the mesh regardless of its orientation. And that's very handy, because we can sort of get a lot more out of these cliffs that we have, and it looks like we have hundreds of them, even though we have essentially only eight of the big ones. In addition to them, we have currently 3 smaller rocks, again with and without the grass shader, and then I have this kind of pebbles that have the same thing. And by using these 3, you get sort of the big details, the medium details, and the really small details. And I think it works quite nicely, as you can see here. Of course, we can use these big ones and just scale them down, but it sort of, it doesn't look like they belong in the same world if we scale them down, because then these smaller ones will have much more detail than the big one, like here for example. So yeah, I don't have that many assets yet. I'm trying to sort of make what I need rather than bringing in a lot of pre-made stuff or anything like that. All the meshes that you see here are made by hand, so I'm attempting to make this game mostly using original material. I'll probably use a lot of textures and audio assets and that kind of stuff, but I'm trying to get by with only original meshes, at least for the time being. Cool. So yeah, we're gonna have to come back to that edge at some point and make it a bit more natural. I'm just gonna undo what I did earlier. But yeah, let's see what we can do about this other side here, if we can make it look nice, and then perhaps make that fit with this one. Okay, so I think we have some pretty nice transitions from mesh to mesh here. I managed to find this one guy here, which sort of filled up that hole quite nicely. I think that will work quite okay. So here you have something that's kind of jarring. There's like a very sharp sort of transition from grass to rock, and also the shape is obviously different, so that sort of gives it kind of away that okay, there's another mesh there, which is that's not the end of the world, and as I said earlier, you can clearly see them in some places, but there's some tricks that you can do to make them a little less visible. Something like this might work quite okay, especially when we add some smaller rocks and pebbles and whatnot to them. But generally I try to sort of fit these guys so that these sort of protrudences from one goes into like a crevice of the other, and then maybe adjust the terrain a little bit so that it sort of fills up the areas. Sometimes you can just fill up those problematic areas with terrain, but not always. So the terrain system that we have here is this is a very classical height map system. So you can move it up and down like this, but not sideways. And there are a few ones that you can use. You can like smooth it and set it to a certain level and whatnot. And in addition to that, we have a painting system. So if we select the terrain, you can paint. You can set up materials and paint them. So like you have gravel, and then maybe on top of that you have a bit of mud and etc. And currently the grass texture, or the shader that applies this, it uses the same texture as the terrain, so it combines this grass, which is this green stuff here, and then there's a dry grass, which is this slightly more brown grass variant, and it fills them up and tries to put drier grass on more sloped areas, and the normal grass on more flat areas. So also one problem is that you can't paint grass in the same way on the rocks currently, which means that you'll have to use some other tricks to actually make the transitions look nice. Usually that involves sort of in an area like this, for example, you bring the terrain down a little bit, so that it sort of flows. I have the strength set up a little too high for my taste currently. Let's even it out a little bit like this, and then we can start painting the same dry grass as happens to be used here, and you can sort of make the seams a little less visible. This is not perfect, but you kind of get the idea. There is actually a way to paint on objects here, at least certain objects. I think we need to add like a paint object storage object into the level, and then enable painting for the current object, and then you can start to actually paint on objects themselves. But you can only paint color. You can't paint textures yet. Oh, actually, it doesn't work on the It doesn't work on the grass that's applied by the shader. But yeah, you can paint on arbitrary meshes. Hello. Which can alleviate some of these problems, sort of, if you can just paint the mesh a little bit, sort of tint it a certain color around these seams that make some of these objects go away completely, or lessen their impact on the final result. Okay, let's keep going. Alright, so here's one thing that we need to keep in mind during the demo mission. You'll be approaching from this angle here, and you're supposed to meet up with another NPC, which will be around here. Actually, I think this is probably his spawn point. Yes, this thing which almost looks like a holy hand grenade from Monty Python is a spawn point. So when we come here, we don't want to block the view to that spot. I think the camera is roughly on this level. So we'll have to make sure to keep this area sort of visually clear. When I place these rocks, I typically carve around them a little bit, especially if they're placed on. Oops, let's lower the strength a little bit. If they're placed on the terrain, I find that sort of gives them this more natural look. This is a little too much, perhaps. Let's actually undo all of that and do it again with a slightly more sensible brush, like this. And then you can paint in mud, for example, around the rocks. Again, keeping in mind that we'll have to match this terrain here with this rock, which can't be easily painted, at least currently. So something like this. And what we're trying to achieve here is kind of, we're thinking about like how would the water flow when it rains and it sort of flows down. It almost kind of eats a little bit of this soil here and brings it down with it. So we'd probably actually wanna like carve this away a little bit, and here we have quite a natural path for the water. So actually, maybe what we want to do here is exaggerate the mud a little bit. Actually, there's another place here that I kind of went with the same idea here, that if it rains, the water is going to flow down here and eventually reach this river. These are the kind of small things that sort of the player might not even notice as they're sort of speeding by this place, but it's quite easy to do, and it gives it a sort of more natural feeling with fairly little work. And then just add some rocks around the place. Since when the water is coming down, it sort of moves the soil with it, but leaves some rocks around, and yeah, that looks quite all right. So we have kind of the same thing here, except this is not the same kind of, there's not the same kind of funnel here as with the other place. So I'm not gonna go too crazy with this. Right. Alright then. Here we have a collection of rocks where I think it's quite okay to sort of make it feel like these two are two separate rocks. But I think it's kind of important again to think about what happens in nature when these things sort of settle down in a certain place, and have this rock, for example, is kind of nesting on this other one here, not even trying to make it look like they're two separate things. I should perhaps mention, by the way, that this is by no means any kind of level design tutorial or anything like that. I have no business giving you that kind of advice, because I have worked almost all my professional life as a programmer rather than a level designer, so I really have no business teaching you any best practices or anything like that. But I figured it might be interesting for you to see how I make the levels for this game. And these are just kind of things that I've found that I found to work quite nicely for this project. Right, so if we kind of consider our water flow again, this is how the water would kind of flow. So let's just carve out these a little bit. Make sure it looks nice, and sort of make it so that it looks like the objects are sort of sitting in the terrain rather than being placed there in a level editor. Certainly don't want that to be the impression that the player gets. And again, put some mud here. When it comes to placing trees, I find that they tend to look best if they're placed in some kind of small alcove or sort of like. Sometimes it's okay to just put a tree right in the middle of an opening like this, but they tend to look nicer if they're sort of off to the side, and I guess you can imagine that the tree has sort of been given some shelter from the wind and whatnot in this place, and sort of gotten to grow in peace. And as opposed to the rocks, with trees you can almost sort of make the terrain rise up, well, not exactly that much, but almost have the terrain rise to meet the tree, which I guess sort of makes sense considering the roots of the tree and them sort of keeping the terrain together, or keeping the ground together, sort of keeping it from sort of falling down and becoming flat when you have these roots underground. Something like this. And then a lonely tree by itself usually looks quite lonely, so let's put some rocks and pebbles. You shouldn't actually be afraid to bury these guys kind of deep in the ground. That maybe doesn't look all that good because the rock is kind of underneath the tree, so let's move it a little bit away. Sometimes just the hint of a rock being there is almost nicer than having the rock sort of sit on the ground. So I found that whenever a rock doesn't look nice, you just need to bury it deeper in the ground. Maybe that doesn't make sense, but I think that often looks quite good. And whenever there are, or wherever there are rocks, there are also smaller rocks. And I usually make these in sort of collections like this, rather than just having one. Actually, we can turn on this kind of placing behavior where the editor tries to sort of match the orientation with the angle of the terrain. Yeah, they're usually in collections, partly because that makes it more efficient for the renderer to just batch them together, but also you can just rotate these however you like, and you don't need to be afraid to have some of them completely hidden if that looks good. You know, if you just want one of those rocks, you can just do this, and the other one the rest will be underground. These are so low poly anyway that it doesn't really matter. And of course, this whole game is the aesthetic that I'm going for is fairly low poly. If you're working on a higher poly game, that might not be the case, but in this case, these are like, I don't know, 50 vertices or something like that, so it really doesn't matter if some of them are underground. And they get batched together anyway. So I imagine every commercial engine out there does nowadays. So yeah, something like that. I'm not actually super happy with this tree. Let's try another one. I have a few of these spruces. The one that we had was kind of like almost looked like a Christmas tree. All right, I have the placement that tries to like match them with the normal. So let's turn that off and maybe we should rotate it a little bit, but not super much. Yeah, maybe it's a little too crooked. Yeah, yeah, this thing actually happens fairly often when I design levels, that I kind of I start with a plan to like redo this, and then I go here, and then I get like this idea, like, oh, that would be a nice place for a tree, even though it had nothing to do with the other area, the one that I had originally planned to do. But that's fine. You should go with the flow wherever it takes you. Let's see if we can fit another one here and make it look natural. Now it sort of looks like the tree is surrounded by rocks. That's not supposed to be the case. Yeah, maybe something like that. Alright then, I think I'm gonna alter this position a little bit, because I kind of like the idea that there's this kind of slope around this place. And I don't necessarily want the NPC to be spawned on a slope, just because it will be a vehicle, and the vehicle might actually just roll down the hill. Actually, I'm not sure if that's the case. And I can enable the handbrake, but at least for now, I think I'm gonna just move the position a little bit further away from the cliff, and it doesn't really make sense for the vehicle to, or for the NPC sort of lore way to actually park really close to the cliff. It makes more sense for him to be here, almost kind of hidden behind this cliff. So let's move him a little bit, and probably upwards as well, something like that. That's starting to look quite nice. Right, so I'm actually kind of happy with how this side turned out. So I might actually continue with this a little bit. I think these cliffs here will be kind of easy to get placed, because this slope here is way too steep to drive up anyway, so you don't really have to like take the player into account when placing these, in the sense that he would be able to drive over them. The game doesn't really have any blockers that would prevent you from just driving all over the place. Otherwise, it might have a few, but the idea is sort of that, like, if something looks like you should be able to drive there, then you should. So, for example, you should be able to drive down here, and that should be fine. And so it actually also bears to keep in mind that which of these objects actually have physics collisions. We can visualize them like this. So as we can see, these cliffs and rocks have collisions. These smaller pebbles don't actually have, which is both from a performance perspective, but also because you don't really want the vehicle to react to every single small rock and pebble that you drive over, especially at high speed. It might cause some really nasty things to happen. You like flip out. Actually, now that we have these on, I can see here that that my old hydro plant is still here. It's just hidden. So that's interesting. Let's see, where's the old hydro plant? I can actually see it's right here. Right, so if we just hide this guy, we have this one here, and these are all hidden. Right, so you can see the old blockout hydro plant, what it used to look like. It was positioned a bit differently, so the water surface worked with that, but it had to be moved a little bit for the newer one. But yeah, we can actually just get rid of this completely. Let's see, what do we have? We have those. We have a scale mannequin. These scale mannequins are here. I mentioned it in one of my blog posts. The plan is not to have a lot of animated characters running around in the game. They're sort of considered to be inside their vehicles at all time, but it still makes sense to think about the scale when designing the levels, so that everything looks correct. And I actually have a lot of these guys, as you can see in the level as I'm designing them, just to sort of give you the idea of okay, how tall would the average person be in this world. I think these are like 1 meter 80 centimeters or something, which is pretty close to the average height of an adult. Okay, let's get rid of this layer completely. We don't need the old hydro plant anymore. Right, yeah, so here you can actually see that this is probably the biggest mesh I have currently in the game, which is the biggest single mesh. So this is a very sort of specific mesh for this very position. It won't fit anywhere else. Right. But yeah, I think I'm gonna continue with this area here and just get rid of these white box cliffs and see what comes out of that, and then I'm gonna revisit this side later. It does look all right. It's a little too obvious that we have like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 different meshes just placed next to each other, which is sort of the thing I would like to avoid. It might make sense to try to hide that using decorations, and it also might help if we just try to position them a little better, but I'm not exactly sure what would be the best idea here. Okay, I think this area is starting to come together quite nicely, actually. There's some things here that don't look super nice. For example, here we have a very plain face, like a rock face, cliff wall, and this is very detailed, or uneven, shall we say? But doesn't necessarily matter that much. There's gonna be, we're gonna add some boulders and rocks and whatnot in like on the ground here in front of this. I kind of like this silhouette of this sort of fairly smooth sort of top of this rock. Let's actually get rid of that. It's a bit distracting. Kind of gives you this, makes you wonder, like, what would it look like to stand up there and look down on this. So that's nice. Yeah. When it comes to placing like smaller rocks and whatnot, I usually do the same thing as I do with the water. Sort of think about like, okay, what happened here? For example, here's this place gives you the sort of the feeling that, okay, these have probably sort of fallen down from up there, and there are all these like smaller rocks scattered around, and that can be a pretty good way to give more interest and sort of a natural feel to this. Like if we hide these guys, it just looks very boring. Well, you can see where I painted on the ground, but it sort of tells you, like, okay, right, these probably came down from up there, some like thousands or millions of years ago. I don't know why I'm so excited about rocks and why they're lying, but I am. Can't help it. I wonder if we should make this power line a bit straighter. Yeah, so these power lines are they're controlled by these points here. You can move this up, and it makes a very weird power line. They're not rendered in the editor. They just have this debug line, which is why they look a bit weird. And they get a proper mesh in the game, which is following the spline. Maybe we should just move this a little bit away. It looks a little weird when it's going like this and it's very close to this rock face here. Actually, no, let's not do that, because yeah, we have some gameplay that takes place in this area later on. Maybe that's why I put it closer to the rock. Yeah, and the AI is also driving the cars in the same way that the player is doing. The AI is applying like acceleration and brake and turning the wheels, etc. So it doesn't really kind of cheat, which makes it sort of prone to getting stuck on things. And I have to fix bugs in the AI code all the time when I find something that doesn't work. So the fewer objects that the AI can get stuck on in like critical places, the better. Let's just keep it where it is for now. Right. I wonder if we should not go too far into this valley before we have these places that we've actually touched already in a certain state. What's that? Let's get rid of those, smooth them out a little bit. So I think I'm gonna draw the line basically at these rocks, and then maybe we'll replace these still, and then sort of keep this whole thing around here for another time. But we'll see. Yeah, I think that's what we're gonna do. So this area up here on the hill, this is one area that the player will never be able to visit unless they somehow manage to do it. Never say never, but this is not a place that matters that much from like a close-up perspective, which is why I don't put that much effort into making it look nice. I think we might want to have a few more rocks up there, just to sort of, this is very kind of boring now, the silhouette between the ground and the rocks, so just put something like that there and maybe rotate it in some crazy, oh come on, my gizmos are acting up. Rotate them a little bit, like the camera is going to be roughly on this level, I think. Let's again check with the card. This is sometimes the best way to do it, like yeah, roughly like this is what the game is going to look like. So as long as you have like a little bit of detail up here, it will look nice. And you can even scale these low poly meshes up quite a bit. They will still look quite okay. Let's actually maybe bring this in the foreground a little bit. Something like that. And put some more trees there. And yes, we do have red spruces in this game. This is not supposed to be Earth. This is another planet. The game is set in a sci-fi universe, and so far it kind of looks like it could be on Earth. But I plan to have a skybox that makes it very clear that we are not on Earth. That's not there yet. But yeah, I'm taking some liberties with how things work and behave and look because of that. But okay, I think this is starting to be quite nice, and we've gotten rid of all the white box meshes in this part of the map. Looks something like this, and if we turn on the fog again, starting to look quite nice. Obviously there's a lot of detail on the ground missing still. One thing that's completely missing currently is foliage. We do have a layer here for the foliage, and there are tools here for actually painting foliage. This, for example, is quite handy. This is a grass type which assumes the color of the underlying terrain, and so now if we go to this, mud is probably actually fine, and then we paint some mud here. We can actually see the grass sort of getting the color of the mud, etc. But I'm not very happy with how this looks currently, so I've decided to postpone the whole foliage to a little later, and there will also be other things other types of foliage besides grass, so bushes and flowers and whatnot. I have tried some things here. These are actually not made by me. These are purchased from some online store. I don't even remember which one anymore. They're quite nice. I'm not sure they actually fit the visual theme perfectly, but we'll see. Yeah, and this wind thing that they have going on, this is a shader trick. It's actually the same thing with the trees. So there's just a bit of noise that makes the leaves sway in the wind, and these guys have it as well. So I think when we get like grass and bushes and whatnot added to something like this, I think it will look quite nice. I'd say this area is well, I shouldn't say final, because everything is very far from being final, but this is pretty much what I imagined it should look, minus the foliage. All right, so what's next? I think we'll tackle this area next. Add some rocks and tweak the ground and something like that. And I think maybe after that I'll end this video. This has been a fun thing to do, and I'll probably do more in the future. But I need to make sure I get the whole video editing system going, etc., before spending that much more time on this particular video. Alright then, I think we're approaching something that we can live with for now. So these areas are obviously not going to look that nice without a little bit of foliage. I figure we could maybe try just as a test. I'm not going to keep it, but maybe try to see what it would look like if we added the grass to this area. So let's see where that takes us. Actually, let's start by adding a character here. If we consider the size of the person, or a scale mannequin rather, not a character, but a scale mannequin. If we consider the size of that scale mannequin, and we would like to add grass here, you can see that this grass is kind of tall. It's not your average lawn, which I guess makes sense because we're in the middle of the wild, essentially. This is kind of one of the reasons why I'm not super happy with the grass currently, because the terrain texture is fairly detailed. Like, it has all of these blades of grass actually already in the texture, so it kind of makes sense for that to be the actual grass, and these would actually be some kind of weeds or something like that would only grow in clumps. But then again, they're fairly low detailed, so I would probably want to tweak the model a little bit, but we can just do that. But anyway, let's add some of this here. So actually, let's use a slightly smaller variant. I think that's the number 2. Yes. And a slightly smaller variant here in the more sloped areas. And then when we have these grass patches added, we can scale them and we can remove them later. This is something that I'm just completely winging it. I'm not really planning for this, and I don't think it looks all that nice, but just as a test, you can add the density a bit higher so that the tool allows us to place these things a bit closer together. And again, I'm probably not going to want to cover the entire ground with them, but actually almost like the trees, sort of keep them a little bit off to the side. Now obviously we have them in almost every place here. And they don't really fit with the, like they're kind of looking, they look like they're floating on the ground. Yeah, it's not great. Anyway, let's scale some of these areas up a little bit and others down. Maybe we have a bit more there, and then scale them down towards the middle, and probably just remove the ones in the center of the area. Yeah. I should actually have locked everything except the foliage layer, but can't be helped. What do we have selected here? Yeah, I'm gonna get rid of those. Get rid of some of these, and maybe those as well. Yeah, the lighting is also a little little hacked currently for these guys. It's super jarring, the difference between the light and the shadow from the sunlight. So yeah, I'm gonna have to do something about that as well. One thing that we can do to almost simulate ambient occlusion under the grass is just by painting just a tiny amount of well, mud is actually not that great. Well, let's make them a little muddy. Obviously that's gonna, yeah, that's not a great idea because that's gonna color the grass itself. Yeah. Well, as you can see, you're getting this video completely raw and unedited. Actually, that's not true. I'm gonna speed up some parts of it, but you're getting stuff that wasn't particularly well planned in advance. Oh, damn, I'm actually scaling them down now. Remember how my own tools work. Yeah. So, yeah, this doesn't look very good currently, but yeah, I have time to figure out the foliage. Maybe as the last thing in this video, we can just have a quick drive through the level and the parts that we just made. We're gonna spawn with a pretty slow vehicle, so maybe we'll actually add a scout car here for us. Alright, I actually had to re-record this part of the video because the audio levels got a bit messed up previously. I also realized that my mic was set way too low, so I apologize for that. I'll be better in the future. The level is exactly as we left it in the previous part, except the foliage was removed between the takes, but that wasn't gonna stay anyway, so everything else is as we left it in the video. Alright, so here we are in the game. Here's the default vehicle that we spawn in, which is this 6x6 attack vehicle, but we did place the scout vehicle there, so let's actually just switch to this one, which is a little more agile and nimble. I'm playing with a mouse and keyboard here, so the controls are perhaps not as smooth as they would be when playing with a keyboard, but I'll manage. Oh, actually, we can pause this game here. Those texts that you see in the background, those are actually debug texts from AIs driving around in this part of the map. Yeah, this is something that I should have hidden as well, but oh well, you get to see this as well. You can actually see where you can see the path that they are taking, and those lines that are protruded from the vehicle, those are so-called whiskers that detect obstacles that they might want to avoid. Just so you know what those floating texts are. And as you can see, when you unpause the game, you end up in weird places. So we did roll down the hill because I unpaused it to demonstrate the AI for you. Anyway, let's drive here and look at this part. And yeah, I think this fits the rest of the level quite nicely. I kind of like the silhouette of this rock face here that we created, and one thing that I will need to tweak regarding the visuals is the ambient occlusion is a bit heavy currently. Like if we take the camera here, it was actually, I tweaked it for this white box geometry. I think it's a little too heavy for the actual assets. Like if we toggle it on and off, let's get rid of that one and toggle off the SSAO. You can see that it makes the crevices perhaps a little too dark. I think it fits this kind of white box look quite nice with a very heavy AO, but maybe not the final look that we're going for. But that's something to tweak. Yeah, I think this pretty much sums up the video this time. If you made it this far, thank you very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this, or at least found it interesting. As always on YouTube and the internet, please let me know in the comments. Do you want to see more of this kind of stuff? If you have any questions, comments about the way I design levels, or about the game, or the tech, or anything regarding the project, really. And please keep an eye on the blog and the YouTube channel for more things like this in the future, if you're interested. Let's blow something up. There we go. Anyway, thanks for watching. See you next time.